The night was still when Mara first understood what her fate would be, though the air in the cottage felt heavy with an invisible weight. Her father's voice cut through the dim light like a knife, sharp and impatient as he spat words that branded themselves into her chest. "She's no good to us. She eats more than she gives. She's weak, slow. Better someone else take her." His hand slapped the wooden table for emphasis, the sound making Mara flinch, though she didn't lift her head. She kept her eyes fixed on the dirt floor, her fingers knotted in her lap, as if staring too long at anyone might spark more fury. Her mother, busy with the mending in the corner, didn't argue, didn't even look at her. Mara's brothers exchanged glances, the eldest smirking, the younger one whispering something cruel that made them both snicker. She had been living with this kind of silence and mockery for as long as she could remember. But tonight it carried a finality that froze her blood. By dawn she was being bundled out the door, her few belongings tied in a rag. There was no farewell, no kiss, not even a glance of regret. Only the heavy sound of the mule's hooves beside her and the coarse rope reins in the trader's hand. He was a broad man with little patience for words, and Mara's timid silence did not endear her to him. She walked where he pointed, stumbled when the stones cut into her bare feet, and did not complain when her stomach twisted with hunger. The road stretched endlessly, winding into the wilds, and her heart grew smaller with every step. She wondered if she should feel relief. No more sharp words from her father, no more shameful eyes from her mother, but all she felt was emptiness. Like she had been scraped out and left hollow, the trader's mule carried sacks of grain and a barrel of something that sloshed with each step. Mara was nothing more than another burden he had bought and traded, though she couldn't understand what for. He never spoke to her except to bark an order: "Walk faster, stay out of the mud, don't lag." Days passed like this, each one a mirror of the last. She lost track of time under the endless grey skies and the whipping wind that carried the scent of pine as they climbed higher into the hills. At night he gave her little more than crusts of bread, the kind that tore at her gums and stuck in her throat. When she tried to save a crumb for later, he snatched it from her, muttering that she wasn't worth wasting food on. It was on the edge of the mountain pass that he decided she wasn't worth keeping at all. The morning had broken bitter and cold, the peaks dusted white, even though winter was not yet deep. Mara's feet were swollen, her lips cracked. She stumbled again, and he yanked the mule to a stop. He stared at her for a long moment, his face lined with impatience, then muttered, "Not worth the bother." Before she could even comprehend what he meant, he tossed her bundle to the ground, turned his mule, and trudged on without looking back. She stood there, numb, the realization dawning slowly that she was alone. The wind pressed against her thin frame, chilling her to the bone. She looked one way down the road and saw nothing but endless trees. She looked the other, and the trader was already a dark speck, fading. Her legs trembled, and she thought for a moment of lying down right there by the roadside, letting the cold finish what her family and the trader had started. She could imagine the snow burying her, the wolves tearing her away, and the world would hardly notice. But as the hours dragged on, and the hunger gnawed sharper, her eyes caught a faint curl of grey against the backdrop of green and white. Smoke. It rose steady into the sky, too thin to be wildfire, too deliberate to be chance. Her chest tightened as if hope itself might break her apart, but she stumbled toward it, clutching her ragged bundle. Branches tore at her arms, rocks cut her bare feet, but she pressed forward, the smoke her only beacon. By the time she reached the small clearing, she was half delirious. There it stood, a cabin rough but solid, its roof patched with shingles, its door thick with iron hinges. The smoke she had followed curled from a stone chimney, carrying the smell of wood and something faintly savory. And there, at the woodpile, stood a man. He was broad-shouldered, his shirt rolled up to the elbows, as he split logs with practiced rhythm. His beard was streaked with silver, his hair falling wild to his shoulders. His eyes lifted when he sensed her, sharp as a hawk's, piercing right through her trembling form. For a moment his face hardened, suspicion flickering across his features, but then it softened into something else. Surprise, perhaps even pity. "What in God's name are you doing out here, girl?" His voice was deep, rough with disuse, carrying the echo of someone not used to speaking aloud. Mara opened her mouth, but only a croak came out. Her tongue was too dry, her throat too parched. She tried again, but her knees buckled, and the last thing she saw was the man dropping the axe, his long strides closing the distance. Then everything went dark. When she opened her eyes again, warmth surrounded her. She lay on a rough-hewn bed, covered with blankets that smelled of pine and smoke. The crackle of a fire soothed her ears, and the savory smell she had caught earlier now filled the cabin, the smell of stew. She blinked, disoriented, then saw him. The man sat in a chair by the fire, his posture straight but relaxed, his eyes fixed on her with a kind of watchful wariness. "You're awake," he said simply. His voice carried no cruelty, only caution. She tried to sit, but her body ached with exhaustion. He raised a hand, not unkindly, and gestured for her to lie back. "Rest, eat first." He ladled stew into a bowl, set it on the small table beside her. The steam rose in tendrils, and her stomach clenched with need. She picked up the spoon with trembling hands, barely managing to get the first bite to her lips before the tears came. Silent, unstoppable. He watched her without comment, waiting until she steadied. Then in that same quiet tone he spoke again. "My name's Elias. These mountains don't forgive weakness. You stay here, you work, or you don't stay at all. Understand?" Mara nodded, unable to speak, the spoon clutched in her hand as if it were the most precious thing she had ever held. She didn't know what kind of man Elias was, what demons shadowed his eyes, or what would become of her in this cabin. But in that moment, wrapped in warmth with food in her belly, she felt something she had not known since she was a child, a fragile flicker of safety, and though she was still the girl her family had called useless, still discarded by a world that saw no worth in her, some small ember stirred deep inside. For the first time, she thought that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't finished yet. The first snow came silently, blanketing the mountains with a hush that pressed down on the cabin. Mara woke to find the world outside turned white. The trees bowed beneath the weight, the river slowed beneath thin sheets of ice. She stood by the window, wrapped in the patched blanket Elias had given her, her breath fogging the glass. And for the first time since she had arrived, she felt something like awe. The world was beautiful, terrifying, endless. Behind her, the steady scrape of Elias's knife against wood filled the cabin as he whittled something with practiced care. It was their rhythm now. He worked, she tended. They moved around each other like two shadows slowly learning to share the same space. By then, weeks had carved away her weakness. Her hands bore calluses from chopping wood and hauling buckets from the stream. Her arms were stronger, her steps no longer stumbled. The hunger in her face had softened, replaced with a determination Elias couldn't help but notice. She no longer shrank at his presence. Instead, she studied him, learning when silence meant thought and when it meant grief. But with the snow came new challenges. The nights were long, the cold seeping into their bones despite the roaring fire. Food grew scarcer, the traps sometimes empty, the river reluctant to give up its fish. Elias hunted, but his old leg injury slowed him, and more than once Mara found him grimacing as he tried to walk off the stiffness. She began taking on the tasks herself, checking traps, hauling water, climbing onto the roof to clear snow before it collapsed under the weight. Each time Elias would bark at her that it was too dangerous, but she only lifted her chin, reminding him, "You said I had to work or leave. I choose to work." One night, as the wind howled and wolves cried in the distance, she caught him watching her across the fire. He had been carving again, shaping wood into something smooth. When she met his gaze, he held it longer than usual, then set the object down beside her. A comb, roughly made but beautiful in its simplicity. She picked it up, her fingers trembling over the grooves. "You made this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias grunted, looking away, but the flicker of softness in his eyes betrayed him. Mara pressed the comb to her chest, her throat tight, for no one had ever thought her worth such a gift. Winter deepened, storms battering the cabin until it shook, snowdrifts piling against the walls. For days they were trapped inside, the fire their only lifeline. During those long hours, Mara would mend clothes by the fire while Elias smoked his pipe, and slowly stories slipped between them. At first, hers came in fragments, of a father who had never looked at her with pride, of brothers who had called her useless, of a mother who had turned away when she was sold. Elias listened in silence, his eyes darkening, his fists curling around his pipe. It wasn't until much later that he spoke of himself. One night, when the wind screamed so fiercely that Mara thought,